Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com, and before we go any further, I thought it would be a good idea to go over the basics of how phones can communicate with the internet and how they can communicate with each other. And what I'm talking about here really is phone communication via the internet. I'm not talking about text messaging or phone calls. And if you want two separate phones to communicate, you can of course use text messaging, but it's a very expensive and impractical way for two applications to communicate. So we're really talking here about Android devices communicating via the internet. So let's take a look. If you want to download stuff from your phone, then you're basically going to contact a server, and the server is basically the software that it serves up the website or kind of web service that you want to contact. So if you look at BBC News, let's say, there's a server program running there, and what you do when you go to it in a browser is when you type a URL in your browser, you're doing an HTTP GET request, and that is a request to the server in a certain protocol, in the HTTP protocol, that then causes the server to hopefully send back to you some HTML. And it's the same in your phone application. If you want to request some data from a server, you can do an HTTP GET, which is a lot like going to a URL in your browser, and the server will respond with some data, typically in text format, which it will then send to your phone. So you're kind of making a little request, and you're potentially getting a lot of data back. If you want to send data to the internet somewhere, to a computer, basically, you're going to have a server running somewhere accessible via the internet, and then your phone will send data to it, and most typically it will use HTTP post, because with a GET, that's just like typing stuff into the URL bar in a browser, but a post kind of sends things behind the scenes, so to speak, and communicates directly with the server that way. And then the server will still send back some kind of response you'd expect, but it's going to be perhaps just a minimal response even. I mean, it could be anything really, but you'd hope for some response from the server to know that your post succeeded, and the server could even send back a lot of data. It's kind of up to you. But again, when we talk about a phone sending data to a computer, unless you want to talk about text messaging or Bluetooth, which only works in a short range, then we're talking about the internet, and a computer that you want to send data to has to be running server software of some kind, and it has to be accessible via the internet. And usually you won't usually use your own PC, although you could, but unless you've got a fixed IP from your ISP, which you quite possibly haven't, you probably want to use even a free just service that's accessible via the internet, and we'll get into that a little bit. And now, if you want to communicate between phones, then if you think about it, your options are limited. Again, you could use text messaging or make phone calls, or you could use Bluetooth if the phones are really close to each other. But usually you don't use any of these. If you want, if you've got an application and you want to be able to communicate with perhaps the same application on other phones, you want to go through the internet, and you need a server that's running and it's accessible via the internet, and that's the fixed point that both phones can see. And they don't know where to find each other directly, because the IP addresses of your phones are going to change all the time, probably, unless you have a ISP with a fixed IP address and you keep your phone at home all the time, which is unlikely. So usually you want a server to act as a fixed point of reference, and both phones will communicate with the server, but the net result could be that they are communicating with each other through the server. And if you think about something like MSN Messenger, or any kind of email service, or something like Skype or Google Hangout, or anything really that works along these lines, they all have central servers that enable phone to phone or device to device communication. Without that server, they can't work. Now I'm going to show you really briefly like how to create a server using Java and like a free online service. But your server, the actual server here, I'm using in two different senses really. I'm talking about a computer, and you can find free services that can host your server software. But a server, you could also mean the actual software that runs, and you can write that software in Java or in PHP or Python, Perl, or pretty much any programming language. And I'll show you really quickly how to write one in Java, but just bear in mind that Java is not necessarily going to be the language of choice for your server. And if you just want some little script that just sends a little bit of data back to a phone from a database, you might want to choose PHP, for example. But Java is certainly a language that you can use for that purpose, and it's widely used by banks and any kind of serious company that wants to serve up data securely is likely to use a Java software server. Now I have actually got a course on servlets and JSPs which may interest you, and although the course isn't free, the first 7 videos in that course are. So if you go to www.caveofprogramming.com, on the homepage there you can find links to my servlets and JSPs course, and you can look at the first 7 videos without paying anything, and they take you from installing everything that you need on your computer for free to create Java servlet programs, and all the way up to deploying them on the internet for free. And you can then use that as a server which will enable your application to communicate with the same app on other phones, for example, or you can upload stuff to it and download stuff from it. And we're going to look at some of these possibilities. So that's it for this time, and until next time, happy coding.